Sure we're recording. Okay, great. Welcome, everyone. As we gather together on this rainy but not snowy morning, let's give the Lord some thanks. Gracious and loving God, we give you thanks this morning for Denise Dombkowski Hopkins, our friend and leader of scholarship and biblical study. Thank you for giving us a second opportunity to learn from her about biblical passages and beliefs. Many of us have accepted these passages literally without considering the context of their times and the motives of the voices that shaped how and why they were written. Remind us that your covenant is one of steadfast love and faithfulness. Teach us to seek the Spirit's guidance so that what we learn strengthens our commitment to justice, mercy, and trust in you. With gratitude for a community that handles your word responsibly and lives it compassionately during these challenging times. In gratitude and hope, we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Well, at this point,
once again, Carol, an incredible prayer. Thank you.
well,
Those words really touched me.
Thank you so much. And I'll turn this over because some of you were here last session and we want to hear a little bit more about Denise's background and why we're so happy to have her with us.
Yes, so once again, I am delighted to introduce Denise Dombkowski Hopkins, Professor Emerita of Hebrew Bible at Wesley Theological Seminary. She started teaching there in 1986 and retired sort of in spring 2023. So that's 37 years. For about the last third of her pre-retirement career at Wesley, I had the honor and good fortune to be her teaching assistant in her introduction to Hebrew Bible class. I said sort of retired. She continues to teach at Wesley in the Doctor of Ministry program. Her research interests include the Psalms, feminist interpretation of the Bible, and the intersections between the Bible and pastoral care. So we are going to look at how the ancient texts of the Hebrew Bible, in particular uh, the topic of holy war in the book of Joshua, speaks to contemporary challenges like the U.S. political situation and foreign policy. This is meant to be dynamic and interactive. So if you are on Zoom, please put your questions or comments in the chat. Carol and I will be trying to keep an eye on that. And if you are here in person, speak up, raise your hand. I guess try to avoid side conversations so that the owl does not become confused. Okay, with that, please join me in welcoming Denise Dombkowski Hopkins.
Thank you, Jean. As I said last week, Jean was, I miss her. She was the best TA ever. She could have taught the class. And you are very lucky to have her at Bradley Hills. Last week, we talked about Joshua and Holy War, and I just want to recap briefly the major point that we left with, and then discuss the other three very briefly theories about how Israel came into the land of Canaan. And then I will move into looking at American history and its intersections with the seeds of holy war that were planted by the book of Joshua and the book of Deuteronomy. And I think you will be surprised by how much those biblical texts echo either consciously or unconsciously in our American history. So let me begin with a share. And we are going to do, okay. So last time we read the summary of Joshua's campaign, military campaign. Joshua really presents the theory of conquest. Israel came into the land of Canaan and basically buried the people who were there, wiped them out so that room could be made for God's chosen. And I tried to play a video at the end of the session from the Cedarmont kids who spend most of their time in Sunday school making these videos, it appears. They have hundreds of them, and they were gleefully building the walls of Jericho out of cardboard boxes that resemble bricks. I bought the same cardboard boxes for my own children, and they circled Jericho 7 times with horns and clapped their hands, and the walls came tumbling down, and they were full of glee, full of glee. And my question is, what are we teaching our children? Who lives behind the walls of Jericho? Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not only soldiers, but wives and children. And so they died too. So unconsciously, we're telling our children it's okay to kill those other children. If our children were behind those walls, we would look at it quite differently. So when you want to teach your kids or grandkids the favorite Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho, please think twice, or I will haunt you. Okay. All right. So we move from Joshua with its 3 military campaigns. Oh, and before I look at this slide, remember what is the major tool of holy war? Do you remember that Hebrew word that was guttural? Can anybody say it? Do you remember? Harem. Yes. Harem, which is literally to set aside, and in the context of holy war, it means to exterminate, to destroy utterly. So you put cities under the harem or the ban, it means they're toast. Now, there's another theory of how Israel came into the land, and it's called the immigration theory, and it's supported by the Book of Judges. And the Book of Judges show very clearly that some areas in Canaan were slow in coming under Israelite control. So if you turn to Judges chapter 1, if you have your Bibles with you, and look at verses 27 following in chapter 1. I won't read all of the names and all of the tribes, but you'll get the gist from one of them. Verse 27, Manasseh, meaning the tribe, because each of the tribes seemed to have a role in in separate military campaigns. Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Beit Shean and its villages, or Tanakh and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Ibleam and its villages, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages. But the Canaanites continued to live in that land. Listen to that. That is a direct contradiction of that sweeping summary we saw in the book of Joshua in chapter 11. A direct contradiction. And then it lists all the other tribes. And Ephraim did not drive out so-and-so. Zebulun did not drive out so-and-so. Asher did not. Naphtali did not. Okay? There's an incredible listing of peoples who weren't driven out, which, if you look at the totality, means they didn't drive out many people at all. Now, part of this is an etiology to explain why, after Joshua, there's still Canaanites in the land. But look also at verse 28 of Joshua 1. Of Judges 1. When Israel grew strong, after having Manasseh unable to drive out those inhabitants, when Israel grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but did not, in fact, drive them out. So here's an idea. Well, you know what? We didn't really, we weren't really successful in our military blitzkrieg. And instead, when we came into the land, the Canaanites were there, then we grew strong, and then we enslaved them. This theory is also undergirded by an old, outmoded, semi-nomadic herder theory that the Israelites were semi-nomadic herders who only later needed land for farming. And it was when that need for farming arose that they took on the Canaanites and enslaved them. Unfortunately, that theory is in the toilet now. Sociological and ethnographic studies show that most primitive peoples were not only nomadic herders, but also did farming. It's not an either or, it's not a developmental or linear process, but they were engaged in both from the very beginning. The other piece of support for this immigration theory is the covenant that Joshua makes with the people in Joshua 24. And in that covenant ceremony at Shechem, he addresses those people whose ancestors were beyond the rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates and the Jordan. So all of these other foreigners seem to be incorporated into the people of Israel in that Shechem covenant. And that's the famous covenant in which Joshua says, choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So it's an opportunity for those others, those foreigners, to be incorporated into Israel, which I would like to remind Bibi Netanyahu of. Okay, the third theory of how Israel came into the land is through internal peasant revolt. And that theory was promulgated by Norman Gutfeld, may he rest in peace, a gentle giant of an American scholar who wrote a book called The Tribes of Yahweh that was 1,300 pages long, and that was required reading among the other 12 books that we had for every course. Gutfeld draws upon something called the Amarna letters, which were correspondences between the Egyptian pharaoh. Egypt had control of Canaan in the 14th century, and it's his correspondence with the city-states of Canaan, which included Shechem and Jerusalem and other city-states in the area. And these Amarna letters were filled with complaints from the Canaanite city-states about a group of nomads, classless, landless people called Habiru. Does that sound like Hebrew? Habiru, Hebrew, sometimes pronounced Hapiru, Hebrew. And so scholars surmised that they were talking about the Israelite people. But we cannot prove that that is a solid link. It's a tantalizing suggestion. And there were lots of landless, rootless people circulating throughout Canaan at the time. We don't know if it was the Israelite group. So those who embrace this theory say the Joshua group, coming from the wilderness, acted as a catalyst or a spark and really got the oppressed people in the Canaanite city-states thinking, oh, this is a God who frees slaves. We're going to throw in with this God. So the revolt begins in the Transjordan, in the east of the Jordan River, and spreads across the river into the land of Canaan. And Joshua 9:8 gives a hint of this, a hint. And again, Gutfeld kind of stands on his head to try to.
Is it Judges or
Joshua 9. Yeah, we're moving in between Joshua and Judges. Joshua 9:8. Oh no, you're right. That should be Judges. Sorry. I hate it when I make a mistake on a slide. Joshua 9, Judges 9:8. That's the parable of the trees. We won't get into that right now. Let's bracket
Joshua
that.
9:8. I'm looking at it. I think it's what you mean, Denise.
Okay.
He's right.
They said to
Okay,
him,
read
where,
it, Jean. Go ahead and read it. Jean, go ahead.
They went to Joshua in the camp at Gilgal and said to him and to the Israelites, we have come from a far country. Oh, no, I have, oh, no way. Okay, let me keep going. But the Israelites said to the Hivites, perhaps you live among us. Then how can we make a treaty with you? They said to Joshua, we are your servants. And Joshua said to them, who are you and where do you come from? They said to him, your servants have come from a very far country because of the name of the Lord your God, for we have heard a report of him. No, I think this is not right.
No, it is right. It is right.
This is how the Gibeonites trick them.
Yes, but they did say we've heard of what the Lord your God did in Egypt and what you did to the two Amorite kingdoms of Sihon and Og. Okay, so they're basically saying, we heard how you overthrow oppressive kings. That is the little sliver that Gutfald holds on to. Now, yes, they're employing that to trick the Israelites, but nonetheless, that story about this God who overthrows oppressive kingdoms is circulating in the Transjordan and across into the West Bank. So yes, that is correct. Okay. All right. So that's what I'm saying. They're reaching for these little snippets. So what about all these three theories? Well, all three theories share the same ideas. More than one group was involved in taking over Canaan. The Joshua Exodus group is central. There was a unifying covenant at Shechem, and the Israelites did go first into the hill country in the central part of Canaan and then spread to the south and the north. So all of those theories share that common core. I don't like really any of those theories. I think perhaps snippets from each one can be taken and put in theory number 4, which is where I come down. And this theory was developed by Thomas Thompson, who, when it came out in the 1970s, was fired from his job, and I believe it was at UNC Chapel Hill. You Duke people will love that. And then Robert Coote picked that up in the New Interpreter's Bible. And basically, this theory argues that 8th and 7th century BCE Israelite kings justified their own territorial expansion by, in effect, creating this narrative of the military campaign of Joshua. And remember what I said last time, that Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and 1st and 2nd Kings are part of a larger overarching narrative called the Deuteronomistic history that was brought together, written down, and edited, because these stories are circulating orally for centuries, during the period of exile, of Babylonian exile in the 6th century, because Israel has had the stuffings kicked out of it and it needed to turn to its beginnings to get its bearings, to hold on to its identity. And so this narrative about how Israel came into the land, and then at the end of 2nd Kings, you see it's lost the land. Israel is in exile. The king is in Babylonian prison, released to eat at the Babylonian king's table. So 2nd Kings ends with a cliffhanger. Next season, they will resolve it, right, according to TV. So I think this is the theory that explains the book of Joshua and the book of Judges in some senses, because the story points to kingship, not tribal war. Remember I said last week, how can this band of wilderness wanderers in the Sinai desert come into the land of Canaan with a blitzkrieg? And the military organization and the tight obedience that's required to the king is central to this story in Joshua. This story demands absolute obedience to one commander. So Rahab, if we do her next year as one of the 5 women in the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew 1, Rahab, the prostitute, supposedly, and I'm going to argue she really didn't, converts to the Israelite God to save herself and her family. She's a foreigner who becomes an Israelite, and Achan in Joshua 8 is an Israelite who disobeys the rules of Haram about totally obliterating everything, and he and his family are killed. And both of them are showing that it's absolute obedience or nothing. Rahab was absolutely obedient. Achan was not. She gets elevated. He gets to become toast. So now I realize that I can't project modern ideas of nationalism on the ancient world, but the tight military campaigns, the stylized description of the fall of 12 cities, all points to a kind of later reinvention or polishing. And Joshua becomes the second Moses. And who's he modeled after? King Josiah, good King Josiah, the king who gets an A plus 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 in the eyes of the Deuteronomistic historian. Josiah ruled in the 7th century BCE. Now, you can be horrified by that. The literalists among the army chaplains I teach every year think I am of the devil when I talk about this, but I assure you I'm not. And this makes the most sense to me. So last week I talked about how we need to rethink our understanding of Israelite origins. Archaeology does not support the story in Joshua in terms of what is destroyed. And I think the most damning thing is of the 13 sites, 7 were not occupied then during the time of Joshua, including Jericho, Ai, and Gibeon. And maybe, those stories are an etiology for why those ruins are there. And Bill Deaver, who is a delightful man, it says point blank, the evidence is overwhelmingly against the classical conquest model, overwhelmingly. Okay, so we can look at the Joshua story maybe as an extended etiology of how Israel came into the land. I want to get rid of this. And written down long after the events in Joshua. The point is, God did it. Remember, we talked about the ark as the invisible presence of God symbol. This is a theological, not a historical narrative. And settling in the land was a long, slow process. So maybe, the immigration theory is there. We already read about the summary in Joshua 11, which is oversimplification. Now, having said all that, how did Holy War sneak its way into American history? And I want to, well, you know what? Before that, Peggy submitted a question to Carol, and I want to read her question because I think it's very thoughtful. Does she think there will ever be an archaeological discovery that will be hidden from the world because it will totally disrupt the status quo of history, specifically religious? I read a novel with that premise as a plot. At the end of the book, the archaeologist felt his find would so disrupt the world that he destroyed it. I would say that we, in our popular minds, have an idea of archaeology wrapped up in Indiana Jones. Okay? And Indiana Jones was in it, not really for the history, but for the goodies he could find. Okay? My ex-husband was an archaeologist, dug at Tel El Omari in Jordan every other summer for decades, brought the kids, everything. And all of the archaeologists I know, and I met the whole group, I met Bill Deaver, would never, ever destroy what they found because they thought it was too disruptive. They have an absolute regard for artifacts, which can help us tell the story of how people lived and died in the ancient world. Now, Indiana Jones types, they wouldn't care, but they also would not do careful archaeology to find those stunning artifacts that might change the world. So that's my answer to you, Peggy. And I see a hand up.
Yes.
Yeah. We read in, I guess, popular literature that Jericho is the oldest continuously occupied city in the world.
True.
But then I guess modern archaeology has found that there are periods where Jericho was not lived in. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is
Okay.
correct. And that is the hallmark of archaeology. You have to respect the layers of stratification. And remember that in the ancient world, when a city is destroyed, you build on top of the rubble. So each layer with its artifacts, pottery, bones, animal and human, coins, all tell a story to help date that particular stratum. And that layering is key to careful archaeology. Now, people like Indiana Jones wouldn't give a hoot about those layers. They just dig down and whatever. And a lot of sites have been corrupted that way. But fortunately, a lot of archaeological nation organizations have helped to protect those sites. Although we did not do that in Iraq. Anyway, it's another story. So you're right, it is the oldest continuously occupied, but by continuous, they mean in particular periods through time. And that doesn't mean that the site was ever abandoned totally. I think the language used to describe Jericho is misleading on that score, because Jericho is still a thriving city today, unlike Ai, which is a pile of ruins, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great comment. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I'll get to your second question, Peggy, in a minute. Okay, Holy War in American history. The Puritans. In 1620, Plymouth Colony was established in Massachusetts as the New Jerusalem. In 1629, the Massachusetts Bay Charter noted the divine mandate to, quote, win and incite the natives of the country to the knowledge and obedience of the only true God and Savior of mankind, unquote. Mm-hmm. And this gets to Peggy's second question. No, it doesn't. Not yet. We're not there. It was about the Revolutionary War. Okay, so look at this charter. This charter says we're going into this land that wasn't ours. We know that there are Native Americans there, but dang it, they're going to do life our way or it's the highway. Okay? We're going to win and incite the natives of the country to the knowledge and obedience of the only true God and Savior of mankind. Do you see the intersections with this whole notion of holy war and the conquest of Canaan?
Sure.
Yeah, you see that? And that's going to figure into how important it is for the narrative to lift up Rahab the prostitute, the Canaanite, in Jericho in Joshua 2. But we'll see that next year. And here is a famous painting by George Henry Boughton in the Toledo Museum of Art, the early Puritans of New England going to worship. He painted this in 1872. He wasn't exactly an eyewitness to their going to worship. But this is what we envision, just to get you in the mood. Now we come to Peggy's question. And I asked the question, we're jumping now ahead to the American Revolution. And hopefully you all saw Ken Burns' massive documentary on the American Revolution. And I asked the question, was the American Revolution a holy war? And here we see a famous painting. Actually, it's a reproduction of a lithograph from 1853 by Frederick Heppenheimer. And it is Washington at Valley Forge, sometimes labeled Washington praying at Valley Forge. You know, his face is uplifted. He's praying to God during that terrible, terrible time at Valley Forge. Washington believed the war was in God's hands. What did I say about holy war in the book of Joshua? What did they believe? Why was war holy?
God did.
Yeah, because God was in it. God was leading it. The ark was there in battle. The ark is the invisible presence of God. Washington believed the war was in God's hands. He ordered his soldiers to, quote, implore the blessings of heaven upon the means used for our safety and defense, unquote. Why are there chaplains in the military? I can't tell you how many of the chaplains I have taught over the years who were deployed in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in the Gulf War, were told they had to pray before the troops went out on reconnaissance, before there was a battle. They were kind of the Ark of the Covenant, as it were, right? Some chaplains described themselves as the lucky rabbit's foot that the troops needed before they went into battle. And the chaplains struggle with this all the time. All the time. It tears them apart sometimes. So I'll get into that more when I get to Mark Twain's war prayer and the Civil War, etc. So hold on to that. So how many of you are familiar with the author James Byrd? If you haven't read his book, which came out in 2013, it's old, but boy, is it packed. And you Presbyterians are going to have a little shock. The book is entitled Sacred History, Sacred War. And what Byrd did was analyze sermons from thousands of biblical texts that were preached from during the Revolutionary War. And especially a favorite of the preachers was the book of Exodus during the American Revolution. And the one verse that was preached upon more than any other was from Exodus 15:3. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is a man of war. And in their sermons, Byrd analyzed them and said that for the Americans, Washington was the new Moses, and the colonists were the Hebrews enslaved in Egypt. That's quite a stretch, quite a stretch. And he also concluded that the Presbyterian ministers preached the most warlike sermons. I ran across that and I laughed. Now, I'm UCC, and, we're cousins with the Presbyterians in the Reformed tradition, but he quotes in particular one Presbyterian minister, Samuel Sherwood from Connecticut, who preached in January of 1776. God Almighty, with all the powers of heaven, are on our side, unquote. Okay? Just put it out there. God's on our side. We can do no wrong. And Byrd also noticed that little of that kind of language or argument came from either the Methodists or the Congregationalists. And I will note that the Congregationalists are the foundation of the United Church of Christ, of which I am a member. So you Presbyterians, you must acknowledge your history here, okay? You must. And actually, Jean, when you were doing Presbyterian polity and history, did that ever come up?
I did not ever do Presbyterian polity and history because I was never aiming for ordination.
That's right. That's right. You know what? I just assume Jean is very well read and very smart, and I just assumed. Sorry. Excuse me. So, do you see echoes of holy war in any of this?
Yes. By the way, our Office of Historic Harms has probably addressed this, or we have been in touch with Jermaine, who's the director of that office, but we might bring that up with him. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. Yes, I didn't realize that office existed.
Yes,
Interesting.
yeah.
So that brings us to another question from Peggy. Was the Revolutionary War really a holy war, or simply humans fulfilling their evolving destiny towards a better life, which included religious freedom and which was being discouraged by controlling forces in Europe? It's a very good question, right? And that's what we all learned in our history classes in high school. At least I did. Actually, middle school, I had a all but dissertation, PhD in history, teacher of history in high school, and he was poking holes in everything. Okay, so was it really a holy war? And Peggy, I would say yes. And I want us to consider, as these people come seeking religious freedom, what are they doing to the people who are always already there? Are they giving Native Americans religious freedom? No, not according to the charter of the Plymouth Colony. No, we're going to incite the Indians to, accept our Jesus as Lord and Savior. So the question becomes, at whose expense, at what price does one people gain freedom over another people, right? And this question arises as early as the Plymouth Bay Colony, as the Revolutionary War. And it's a question with us today for immigration, is it not? Because we could also argue that immigrants, not the criminals, but immigrants who are seeking a better life, economically and socially for themselves and their children, are coming to our country for the same reason that the Puritans came to New England. So, Peggy, it's a really good question, but I have to say the Revolutionary War was a holy war, especially in light of the sermons of Washington's own words. And again, it's painful. It is painful to look in the corners of our history, to look at what was glossed over. And I think that's very difficult. We want to hold on to a brighter picture. And I'll have more to say to that in a minute. So, Peggy, what do you think? Oh, you're muted.
I had to mute. There was some background noise here. Yeah, I can see your point.
And I thank you for your question. It was a very thoughtful question. Excuse me.
Yeah, Karen.
I had not a very well-read or intelligent person, but had kind of thought of the American Revolution as being an economic deal that was wrapped in the gift wrap of holy words. Is that?
Oh,
Yeah.
yes. Yes. Actually, in college, I read Charles Beard's Economic Interpretation of History, and he puts forth that very theory that economics is what drove a good part of the American Revolution. I think economics drives most of global politics from the beginning of time, actually. Yes, I see Missy's iPad shaking his head. I don't know your name. The Duke grad. I think it's a solid theory.
I was an educator in DC, and I taught kids who were removed from gen ed because they were intellectually disabled. And at one point I had put up the causes, the things that started the American Revolution were the things that started the Texas Revolution. And I asked the children if there was anything that they saw that was common. And one girl, who was a very basic soul, said that just people don't like to be bullied. And I
They
thought,
don't like what?
people don't like to be bullied.
Ah, yes. Oh my gosh, she spoke volumes.
Yeah, she did. And you should have seen her face when I told her that.
Oh.
Like,
What a gift you were as an educator for those children. Thank you. What a gift. Oh, that gives me chills. Wow. Yeah, so wrapped in the flag, as it were. And the flag is, of course, what? Divinely stamped as, an arm of God, as it were. There is an article that I have my intro class read, penned by Robert Warrior. He is a Native American from the Central Plains. It's entitled Canaanites, Cowboys, and Indians. And for Native Americans, God, the deliverer of the Exodus, in their eyes, becomes God the conqueror in terms of the entry into Canaan and in terms of what happens to Native Americans in our country after actually during the American Revolution and afterwards. It reminds me of people of my African students who talked about Christian missionaries coming to Africa with the Bible, giving the indigenous Africans the Bible, and then taking their land. I once had a Lakota Indian who was an ordained United Methodist minister. He invited me to speak to the national gathering of Native American United Methodist ministers in Lake Junaluska in North Carolina, and they were vilified. They had an uphill battle. They were vilified as caving into God the Conqueror by Native Americans who were forced to, jettison their own religious beliefs. These Native American ministers, pastors, were seen really as traitors because they were worshiping God the Conqueror. Now, why am I saying that? Okay. The book of the book of Deuteronomy and of Leviticus give reasons why the Israelites could exterminate the Canaanites, put them under the harem, under the ban, utterly destroy them, as we read in Deuteronomy. And it's only in this one place. And every time I raise questions about the conquest of Canaan, my students will always point to Deuteronomy 9:4-5. Do not say to yourself, and this is God speaking to the Israelites, it is because of my righteousness that the Lord has brought me in to occupy this land. It is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord is dispossessing them before you. Okay? Is the wickedness specified in that one little snippet? No. But you know what is the primary wickedness that God is probably intending there?
Paganism?
What?
No.
I'm sorry,
Speak up, yeah.
Worshiping other gods.
Worshiping other gods.
Yes,
Yeah.
worshiping other gods. Well, I'm going to break it to all of us. 1/3 of the world is Christian. 2/3 of the world is not. There's a huge selection of nuns in there. They don't have any religion, but there are Buddhists, there are Muslims, there are Jews, there are Baha'i, there are Taoists, there are Sunnis and Shiites, okay? They worship their gods. So does that mean that they're all wicked? 2/3 of the world is wicked? Oh my. Oh my. So let's look at Leviticus 18:24-30. Leviticus 18:24-30. Do not defile yourselves in any of these ways. And there are all kinds of sexual mores and all this kind of stuff listed before that. For by all these practices, the nations I am casting out before you have defiled themselves. Thus the land has become defiled, and I punished it for its iniquity, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. But you shall keep my statutes and my ordinances and commit none of these abominations, either the citizen or the foreign stranger who resides among you. Otherwise, the land will vomit you out for defiling it, as it vomited out the nation that was before you. Excuse me. And then in Deuteronomy 20, 17-18, which lays down, as I said before, the rules for holy war. In 17-18, it says, You shall annihilate the Canaanite peoples, just as the Lord your God has commanded, so that they may not teach you to do all the abhorrent things that they do for their gods, and you thus sin against the Lord your God. Okay? So very clearly, we're good, they're evil. On its face. Any reactions to that? Pretty cut and dried, huh?
I guess one reaction I have is could they have existed, persisted without having taken these actions? Would there have been similar actions from the Canaanites toward them where they were totally attacked? If this strength had not been, I guess, supported. Yeah, how would we have changed history if the Israelites had been able to peacefully coexist? Would that have been possible? Is that,
That's a
you know,
Yep.
Yeah,
That's a
that would be.
great question, Carol. Great question. And it is really predicated upon a modern understanding of nations. So let's not think of nations in the sense of England, America, China, France. Let's think of groups of people uh, that are constantly intermingling. And we're thinking of city states. And when I say city, I'm not talking, I'm not talking Tokyo. I'm not talking New York City. I'm talking something like Herkimer, New York. Teeny tiny little hamlet, right? So if we can push away those modern understandings of nations and this idea that the Canaanites were unified into one nation state, we have instead, a variety of tribes within Israel, of groups of people within the Canaanites, often people grouped together around a common ancestor. And that really is the extent of the boundary. The boundary is pretty fluid. So I would say that coexistence is really mostly the name of the game in the ancient world because life was so precarious. Life was so precarious. So no, I don't think history would have been changed much. I think there would have been a kind of intermarrying, um, sharing of more of a sharing than we are prone, especially today, especially this year, to think about. Does that
We
make
have a
sense,
couple
Carol?
of, no, you, yeah, I didn't think about that, yeah. Michael Gibson has a comment, and then, Han, our
Okay.
theologian, has a comment. But, Michael comments that Kurt Peeler, who was a speaker at our adult ed class, wrote a book about chaplains in World War II, a fascinating study of how chaplains were trained, Jews, Protestants, and Catholics, to avoid proselytizing their creeds in favor of merely addressing the spiritual needs of the soldiers, sailors, and airmen. The spiritual tolerance was a reflection of FDR's idea of freedom. And do you think that, his question is, do you sense that chaplains today have a different mission from the military?
Yes, I do. And that comes from teaching for 20 years military chaplains of all ranks.
Wow.
I think I am hard pressed today to find chaplains from mainstream Christianity. There was not, there was one PCUSA in the group of 24 that I taught this past fall. The rest were the International Fellowship of Gospel Spirit-Filled Churches, or endorsed by Liberty University, which hands out endorsements like candy. And they're literalists, and I have observed some verbatims in which their goal is to convert the patient in the bed to Christianity. They are on a proselytizing mission. And
Ooh,
Pete Hegseth himself, a couple months ago, came out with a statement and said, there are too many religions in the chaplaincy corps. We need more talk about spirituality. But his spirituality is of a particular brand, and it's Christian nationalism spirituality. So,
ugh.
yes, I've seen over the 2 decades a profound shift, and it's
But this,
worrying.
Wow.
that is not a spirituality. That's a political movement.
Well, the problem is spirituality and politics have become so intertwined in Christian nationalism, you can't separate them.
I
Wow.
would beg to differ because that does not sound like spiritualism to me. It just.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I have a slide later on Christian nationalism, which we may not get to, but I
Yeah.
can send to Carol. Okay,
Uh,
Han?
Han, yeah.
Yeah, good morning. You may have alluded to this just now about the fluidity of I guess demographics back then, and or maybe last week I just haven't watched, but weren't the Canaanites pretty much the same people as the Israelites?
Yes,
In that sense, isn't would you consider this more of a civil war than it is a conquest or some sort of extermination of a different group of people?
that is such a good question. If you lined up a Moabite, an Israelite, a Canaanite, a Jebusite in a line, you couldn't tell them apart. Their daily life, their practices in farming and herding were the same. Their languages were interconnected. They're all Semitic languages. Yeah, I think so. But again, not really in terms of our Civil War, which really grouped huge amounts of people, soldiers on each side. These are little, maybe village skirmishes. Again, we've got to get the modern nation idea out of our heads. But that is
Right.
very perceptive.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's move on to the 19th century and the 1830 Indian Removal Act. And again, keep in mind what the Bible has said about the Canaanites and their wickedness. The 1830 Indian Removal Act was fueled by, of course, the American desire for westward expansion, and more than 50,000 Eastern Indians moved westward across the Mississippi River to barren plains where, it was very difficult to survive. And the president, Andrew Jackson, at the time, in his annual message about the Removal Act, said perhaps it will, meaning the act, cause them to cast off their savage habits and become an interesting, civilized, and Christian community. Okay? Is that an echo of Holy War? Especially
Yes.
after we read what was in Deuteronomy about, these people may corrupt you and they're doing their thing and worshiping their gods, and got to worship our God. And then, of course, Manifest Destiny, Go West, Young Man. Yes, I learned about that in high school. Jackson's argument included, and I will tell you that last week I was so furious I couldn't see straight. I was spitting bullets because I had looked at Jackson's speech in his annual message about the Removal Act, and it was gone. It was removed from the national park site where I'd first encountered it. That's a sanitizing of our American history that is abhorrent to me. I was spitting bullets. So in his speech, and again, I had to go to several places to piece together his speech because there are a whole lot of official government sites that don't have it anymore. This is a quote from his speech. Is it supposed that the wandering savage has a stronger attachment to his home than the settled, civilized Christian does? Rhetorical question, don't answer. And then he called the Removal Act generous, quote unquote, Which president lately has been talking about insufficient gratitude from nations across the world?
Our current one.
Diane, did you have a
That
comment?
is a rhetorical question, doesn't need an answer. Yeah. Indians, he said, should be grateful. And as I asked, does this ring a bell today? By the 1840s, from the Atlantic to the Mississippi, no Indian tribes were left at all in the American South, except for a few resisting Seminoles in Florida. That is breathtaking. And then on top of it all, we get the Cherokee Trail of Tears, fomented by the 1836 Treaty of New Echota, which promulgated the forcible removal of Eastern Cherokees. They were put in stockades, rounded up, and then sent west to barren land by boat, wagon, rail, and on foot. And it's estimated that 16,000 Native Americans died from illness, weather, and starvation. Do you call that genocide? Do you call it ethnic cleansing? I do. I do.
Diane has a comment.
Just a comment.
Yes.
Cherokee Museum in Cherokee, North Carolina, just outside of Smoky Mountain National Park, has revised or is in the process of revising their exhibits, I guess, to give their side of the story. And they do have some of these quotes.
Yes.
I really found it very educational.
Thank you. I visited that museum, and I was at the Conference of Native American Ministers. This story needs to be told. I'm so glad you saw that. Wow.
As a history teacher, I went to the Library of Congress and read the reporting of the discussion in Congress as this was considered for voting. It was shocking the way that Native Americans were viewed as beasts, basically. They were below us.
They were
at that time.
What do you do when you want to eliminate the other? You dehumanize the other. So animal imagery is a primary tool, and we just saw the Obamas depicted as apes on government website. So my question is, God is on whose side? In April, if you haven't read Abraham Lincoln's second inaugural address from 1865, please do. And if you haven't seen, The Gangs of New York, a Scorsese film, for which my eyes were closed for half of it because it was so bloody and violent. Abraham Lincoln in his address said, both, meaning both sides in the Civil War, read the same Bible and pray to the same God, and each invokes his aid against the other. And there's a scene in Gangs of New York in which the different gangs are at their dinner tables actually praying to God for victory. Okay? It may seem strange, says Lincoln, that any men should dare to ask a just God's assistance in wringing their bread from the sweat of other men's faces, but let us judge not that we be not judged. The prayers of both could not be answered. That of neither has been answered fully. The Almighty has his own purposes. Lincoln gives me chills still. And then very quickly, if you haven't read Mark Twain's War Prayer, which was published posthumously in reaction to the Spanish-American War at the end of the 19th century, he talks about a New England town that was having a parade for troops that were going off to battle, and there were bands, and then they all piled into church, and the pastor invoked the blessings of God upon the troops. Bless our arms, grant us the victory, O Lord our God, Father and protector of our land and flag. God doesn't protect any other lands and flags, only ours. And then some stranger gets up at the back of the church and says, you have heard your servant's prayer, the uttered part of it. I am commissioned by God to put into words the other part of it. That part which the pastor and also you in your hearts fervently prayed silently and ignorantly and unthinkingly? God grant that it was so. You heard these words, grant us the victory, O Lord our God. The whole of the uttered prayer is compact into those pregnant words. Elaborations were not necessary. When you have prayed for victory, you must have prayed for many unmentioned results which followed victory. And then the concluding paragraph is gut-wrenching. And people in my classes who are either in the military or have spouses in the military were absolutely apoplectic. O Lord our Father, with them in spirit we also go forth. O Lord our God, help us to tear their soldiers to bloody shreds with our shells. Help us to cover their smiling fields with the pale forms of their patriot dead. Help us to drown the thunder of guns with the shrieks of their wounded, writhing in pain. Help us to lay waste their humble homes with a hurricane of fire. And you say, oh my God. Well, I will tell you that people in the military have nightmares about this very thing because they know that there will be collateral damage. And he goes on to say more and then says amen. And then Twain ends with, it was believed afterward that the man was a lunatic because there was no sense in what he said. Look how quickly the nation turns to say, we don't want to look at that. And this is my last slide, and I know we're 2 minutes over time. Andrew Whitehead, I will send you to Andrew Whitehead, and he is, you can find this on, it's a blog with the Kettering Foundation. He's a researcher, and he's also a professor of sociology at Indiana University. And he defines white Christian nationalism, an ideology that desires a close fusion of a particular expression of Christianity with American civil life, saying that it's crucial, central to our national identity, public policy, and social belonging. And these are the 5 elements of Christian nationalism, which he talks about. And I'll let you just read those very clearly. And his most telling statement is critiqued by another article in The Guardian, The Birth of Populism. I got to get rid of this. There are right-wing, left-wing, and centrist populist parties. It is not an ideology, but a political logic, a way of thinking about politics. That's John Judas in The Guardian, The Birth of Populism, because populism is element number 5 in white nationalism. But look at this: traditional social hierarchy, commitment to strong ethno-racial boundaries. Immigration is based on that. Policies right now. Strong, a very clear national identity, which is white and Christian. Idealizing free market capitalism, preference for authoritarian social control, embrace of populism, perceived victimhood, and conspirational thinking. And Whitehead says in his article, every one of these can be found in Project 2025.
Well, thank you. I hate to call time, but we have 2 other announcements and we can't thank you enough. So we'll give you a minute for your parting word, because we want to see you again next year. And we always learn so much from you, Denise. So thanks.
Well, my parting words are, look today in politics for echoes of holy war. Consider it as a thread that runs through our American history, and realize that the Bible has had a large part to play in constructing that notion of holy war. Us versus them, which, the book of Revelation, which ends the New Testament, also draws some very clear boundaries. Only those people washed by the blood of the Lamb can enter the new heavenly Jerusalem. And this last slide is Thomas Paine's Common Sense, quoting Judges 8, where Gideon refuses the offer of kingship during the period of Judges after the settlement in Canaan, and says, neither I nor my sons will rule over you, only God shall rule over you. And that brings us to the no kings demonstrations that we've had in our country. Okay.
Oh, thank you, Denise.
Thank
Thank you so much. Bear with me for just 1 minute. Sunday after next, we have Jeff Nelson with us, who has written a book about dreaming in church and looking at the significance of dreams. And I'll give you more about that, but he is asking us to try to write down our dreams as they occur and look at who the people are in the dreams, what your feelings are about them, what places or events are in your dreams, and where may they come from in your waking life. What do they signify to you, and what other comments might you like to make? So I wanted to put this up because we will be addressing this in 2 weeks. Next week, we'll be listening to Penny Clark, who will be talking about the Supreme Court, the lower courts, and the challenges we have in the current administration. So thanks, everybody. Join us again. Great to have you with us.